Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're here for another episode of Vendetta Sports Media's T20 World Cup coverage. As always, I'm Jerry Walker, and alongside me is Jarrod Prosser. And Jarrod, five matches to recap in the last 3 days as we decided to skip out on the every other day due to India South Africa being a very late match in Australia, very
Yeah.
early match in the US because they were playing in Perth. But what are your thoughts on these five matches? Just quick thoughts.
We this is probably isn't the thing to say when we're trying to G up the World Cup, but we had we had a couple of fairly straightforward matches. We
Mm.
had one that had a little bit of drama at the end in Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, but it was the last two matches that we'll cover tonight: South Africa, India, and then that one in particular, and then a little bit of intrigue with Australia, Ireland as well. Not so much in the result, but some of the stuff that's come out of the match. So Um, yeah, we still had some good stuff to cover here, but it's probably worth getting into some of these ones that weren't quite as
Yeah,
weren't quite as exciting, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah, absolutely. We'll start with one that was kind of one-sided. New Zealand versus Sri Lanka. New Zealand won by 65 runs, 167 for 7 to 102. And really, it was Glenn Phillips who outscored the entire Sri Lanka team. He scored 104 runs from 64 balls, 10 fours, 4 sixes. He was just outstanding for the Kiwis.
Yeah, look, this was like that 65 run margin. It wasn't even that close. New Zealand had this one well and truly under control. But you go back to the start of that New Zealand innings. They batted first, and they lost Finn Allen in the first over, Devon Conway in the third, and then their superstar Kane Williamson in the fourth. So they were 3 for 15. They were reeling the Kiwis, but Phillips came in alongside Daryl Mitchell, who played very much a background role, but still kept his wicket. They rescued the innings, as you said. Phillips 104, 10 boundaries, 4 sixes. It was an explosive knock. Yeah, and to be honest, it wasn't like he came in and just belted the ball from the start either. Both he and Mitchell, knowing that the score, 3 for 15 was pretty precarious, they consolidated for a few overs. It wasn't until I think it was the eighth over when they had an acceleration, 12 runs, and in that over. And from there, they didn't have an over where it was less than six. Phillips was immense though once they accelerated. He started just cracking the ball to all parts of the park and didn't lose his wicket until the third last ball of the innings when he was swinging for sixes.
Yeah.
So just an absolute gem of an innings from him. Without him, like if he goes out for say 20 or 30, then there's every chance New Zealand, you know, there's every chance that the New Zealand bowlers were trying to defend 120. It should have been really difficult.
Mm.
Um, Having said that, ultimately it really was just one guy that got on top of him. The Sri Lankans bowled quite well outside of Phillips just picking him off at will. I thought Kasun Rajitha was quite good. He picked up Williamson early. He had 2 for 23. And Hasaranga, the spinner, the talisman for this bowling attack, 1 for 22, and he was better than that. He was really, really difficult to get away. 1 for 22 doesn't explain how good Hasaranga was in this inning. Even
No,
against Phillips, Phillips couldn't really get him away either.
yeah, no, not at all. Saranga has been one of the best players probably in this whole World Cup, especially on the bowling side. And I mean, he had 9 dot balls, but allowed only 22 runs in his 4 overs. And as you mentioned, Kasun Raji, he had 16 dot balls, so he wasn't exactly giving the Kiwis much to bat against. Kind of,
Yeah, a bit of a contrast in what they did though. Like Rajitha, he got picked off by Phillips. He got dispatched to the boundary a few times by Phillips, which is why he only got scored off. I think it was 8 out of his 24 balls, but he still conceded 23 runs. Hasaranga, it was either dot balls or runs. He was just really difficult for the Kiwis to pick up and dispatch. It was more a case of after like halfway through his allotted 4 overs, you could almost see them say, "Let's just rotate the strike. Let's just do what we need to do. Get through these overs. Don't lose a wicket, and then we can belt the bejesus out of the other bowlers." And in an innings where Phillips is going just mental, Hasaranga held up his end really well.
yeah, but I mean, looking at the other side of the Sri Lankan bowling, three of their bowlers allowed 34 more runs, which you're not going to win very many matches doing that.
So. Yeah, and again, a lot of that comes down to Phillips. It was a one-man show, but it was a hell of a show.
It was.
And he just got on top of practically everyone who wasn't named Hasaranga.
Yeah, and it was hard. You would think maybe 167. We've talked a lot in the past about that 160 mark as being what you kind of need to win, and New Zealand kind of shut them out in the Sri Lankan innings with Brent Bolt, especially 4 wickets for only 13 runs in his 4 overs, including 3 wickets in the first 4 overs. He was playing out of his mind.
Oh, mate, it was the old firm. It was, Bolt and Tim Southey. They got it done. As poor as that New Zealand start was, in their batting innings, the Sri Lankan one was worse. They lost their top 3 inside the first 2 overs for just 5 runs. As you mentioned, Bolt picked up 3 early wickets, and he got his 3rd in the 4th over. And Sri Lanka at that stage were 4 for 8. Like, just an epic top order collapse. And this is a Sri Lankan side that doesn't bat deep. So straight away you knew that, the old fellas from New Zealand had gotten the job done. Rajapaksa and Shanaka tried to rescue the innings through the middle stages, but they batted well. Both got into the 30s, 35 for Shanaka, 34 for Bhanuka Rajapaksa, but neither of them really kicked on. Sri Lanka needed one of those two to go on and make 70 or 80 to give them a chance, and ultimately the New Zealand bowlers did their job. And I think, Jerry, that this wasn't so much a bad batting performance from Sri Lanka. This was just like all 5 of New Zealand's bowlers were on their game from the outset. Mitch Santner, 2 for 21. You'd be talking about him as the best bowler on most days, but he was the 3rd best bowler in this innings.
Yeah, it was really impressive bowling from New Zealand. And I mean, you mentioned how it was a lot of early wickets, but we've seen Pathum Nisaka and Kusum Mendis go off in some of these matches, but the 2 of them just combined for 4 runs from 8 balls. And as soon as they went down, you kind of had a feeling New Zealand was going to run away with this match. And sure enough.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get through that Sri Lankan top order, they're pretty brittle as a batting lineup. And, we've mentioned Bolt, Santner, Southey, but, Lockie Ferguson's the quickest of the lot. He's scary when he's on his game. So this is a really good New Zealand bowling attack, and they just swamped.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, up next for the 2, New Zealand plays England, and could be an exciting match, could tell us a lot from that top few in the group. But Sri Lanka plays Afghanistan, which, don't know if you saw it or not, Afghanistan lost their opener, Hazratullah Zazai. He's got injured, and he's out for the rest of the World Cup. So that's a big loss for that Afghanistan side. Yeah,
and the Afghanis have got some world-class players, but again, they're not a deep side at all. They need all their best players playing. That New Zealand-England game, New Zealand are now in control of Group 1. Like, they should. It's going to take a massive, massive collapse for them not to make a semi-final, and they really should finish top of the group. But how this match goes, England-New Zealand, pretty much decides the second spot. If England win it, they're probably going to get to the semi-finals. If they lose, it's probably Australia's spot. So it is a game with massive, massive ramifications.
No, absolutely.
Not so much for New Zealand, but for the rest of the group.
Yeah, because as of now, New Zealand sits atop with 5 points from 3 matches. Australia 5 points from 4 matches. Then England 3 points from 3 matches. So it's very much, if England can get the win against New Zealand, a lot could be going their way and could be looking at a semi-final spot on the horizon.
Yeah, exactly. I think Sri Lanka are done. I think Afghanistan won't make it. The Irish have only got 1 game left. They're not going to make it. So ultimately, it comes down to if England can tie Australia for points, they've got the better net run rate. They'll get through.
Yeah.
We'll come to that because we'll preview those games a bit later on.
But we'll move on to Bangladesh and Zimbabwe, which there's a little bit of excitement at the end of that match. Bangladesh
Yeah.
ultimately won by 3 runs, 150 for 7 to 147 for 8. And it really started with that strong opening from Najmul Shanto,
Shanto, yeah.
71 from 55, 7 4s, 1 6. He was honestly really solid for this Bangladesh side.
I almost did a double take when you started to say 71 from 5. I thought that's a
Yeah, no,
prodigious innings.
that would have been insane. 71 from 5. I don't even think that's possible, but
Mathematically, no, it's not.
no.
Yeah, look, this was a really good game. It was a pretty eventful Bangladeshi innings, as you mentioned. Shanto at the top of the order, a career best 71 for him. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of support there. Afif Hussain had 29 off 19, Shakib Al Hassan 23. But at the same time, I reckon the Bangladeshis will feel a little bit fortunate to hit 150. Zimbabwe bowled quite well, and as you know, I've said it practically every time we've spoken about Zimbabwe. I'm a big fan of their pace attack, but they dropped a few catches and they made far too many misfields. I honestly reckon they handed the Bangladeshis another 10 to 15 runs on the day, and in what turned out to be a tight match, that ultimately proved costly for them.
No,
Yeah, sorry, go on.
no, I was saying absolutely. Yeah, Zimbabwe had their chances to get Bangladesh out for far fewer runs, but
Mm.
weren't taking their opportunities. But Richard Ingrava, 2 wickets, 24 runs in his 4 overs. Really, he got a third wicket in one of the overs by a run out. But him and Blessing
Yeah.
Rabani, 2 wicket. He had 2 wickets for 13 runs in his 2 overs. Those two kind of carried that Zimbabwe bowling and made it a reasonable chase amount for the Zimbabweans to.
Yeah, Musa Rabani, you know, 2 wickets in 2 overs was impressive. He was expensive, going at 6.5, but he only bowled the 2 overs, which I found interesting, considering he is such a wicket taker. Um, I didn't see anything, and I haven't seen anything since about an injury, so I'm not sure what the reason behind Blessing Musarabani only bowling half of his overs was.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to see if anything comes out before the next match with that one, because the Zimbabweans have some good bats, but they ultimately rely on their bowling. And if they lose one of their key pieces, that could be a really big blow to them moving forward.
It could absolutely. And I mean, as far as bowling goes, we've seen Sikandar Raza bowl pretty well throughout this tournament, but he only got 1 wicket, giving up 35 runs in his 4 overs. Very expensive inning for him.
He was due a bad one, to be honest, because he is quite enigmatic, but he bowled consistently well, even through the preliminary rounds. But yeah, he was probably due a bad day, and he had a bad day with the bat as well. Going out for a duck off, what was it, 3 balls, I think.
Yep. Indeed. And I mean, it was a rough start for the Zimbabwe batting inning anyway. 4 wickets they lost in their first 6 overs. Wasn't really looking good until Sean Williams came up and went 64 from 42 with 8 boundaries. But outside of him, it was kind of a relatively sad inning for Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it was a weird one, the Zimbabwean innings. They were scoring at a reasonable clip even from the get-go, but as you mentioned, they lost 4 wickets inside the first 6 overs. So as much as they were scoring, if not explosively, they were certainly building up enough of a base of runs that they could explode later on. But the key to that sort of tactic where you putter along and then explode late is that you've got innings, you've got batsmen sitting in the sheds. But when you're 4 down inside 6 overs, you really don't have that luxury. In that situation, Sean Williams comes in. He could have consolidated for a few overs. Instead, he decided to fight fire with fire and just counter-attacked like all hell. It was a fantastic innings from him. Just like he really, his country were looking out of it, and he brought them back into it. In the end, he could have won them this match, but in the end, it was a brilliant piece of fielding from the Bangladeshi skipper, Shakib Al Hassan, to run him out. It was Al Hassan was bowling, collected the ball, ran to his right, collected the ball, and basically diving, threw the stumps down from a really tight angle, and you could see Williams just threw his head back. Thought, how the hell did he hit that? How did he make that run out? It was a bit of a risky run, admittedly, but just a superb effort from Al Hassan, and it turned the game back in Bangladesh's favour.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Williams doesn't get out right there on that great play, it could end up he could end up going for 70, even 80 maybe, and it would have been a Zimbabwean win for that, but wasn't enough. Ryan Burl tried his best to close it out, got 27 from 25, but talk to us about the exciting or interesting end, to say the least, that final over.
Yeah, a little bit controversial, but ultimately the right call. Zimbabwe looked good coming into the last over, but Musadek Hussain was bowling that last over. He got rid of Brad Evans with the second ball of his over, and then had Richard Nigarava stumped on the second last ball. That brought the number 11 batsman, Musa Rabbani, to the crease, needing 5 runs off the last ball. So a boundary to tie, and that was what he was hoping for. So he swung, he swung like an outhouse door, completely missed the ball and was stumped. And, everyone's going off the field. They've shook hands. The Zimbabweans got their heads down. Bangladeshis are celebrating. And suddenly the umpires are calling everyone back out into the field. The third umpire had a look at the dismissal, and the Bangladeshi keeper, what's his name? Nurul Hassan, the Bangladeshi keeper, he had collected the ball in front of the stumps, which you are not allowed to do. The ball must be past the stumps before a wicketkeeper takes possession of the ball. So basically it became a no ball, which meant that the ball had to be replayed and the Zimbabweans had an extra run. So Musa Rabbani had another chance, and this time a boundary would have won the game. Again, swung for the fences and completely missed it. He's a number 11 batsman for a reason. And Bangladesh, at the second time of asking, held on for a pretty tight win.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminded me of play in the India-Pakistan match, where it did look like, I believe it was Pakistan collected the ball right just in front of the wickets, but it wasn't called for that, and India ended up winning anyway. But it was very close. Bangladesh thought they'd won. Kind of suddenly it feels like, oh shit, we might not be out of this match yet. We still need to get the job done, and they ended up doing it. Musa Rabbani, like you said, the 11th batter for a reason, swung for the fences and just whiffed it completely.
But imagine though, like, he swung hard. Imagine he hits that and he does hit the boundary or clear the boundary for a 6 and Zimbabwe win. Imagine the furor, imagine the controversy that would have come out of that it wasn't called by the square leg umpire, it was called by the third umpire after the play was called dead. Like that, I reckon there would have been discussion for days about that and potential rule changes and all that sort of stuff. So it's something to keep an eye on, that if that happens, 6 months, 6 years down the line, we can sort of come back to this moment and say, okay, I remember this situation from here, but there was no, I guess, consequence because let's call it the right team won. Bangladesh were better. Yeah. So ultimately, the result was the right result, quote unquote. But yeah, it was one of those ones where if it had gone the other way, I reckon we could have been seeing some headlines.
Absolutely. And up next, Bangladesh's toughest match against India. Zimbabwe looking to bounce back against the Netherlands. I think they probably will, but we'll move on to another match in Group 2, Pakistan versus the Netherlands, and pretty straightforward win for Pakistan. Exactly what they needed to get back in kind of the swing of things. They won by 6 wickets, 95 for 4 to 91 for 9, and the Netherlands opened this game batting, and it was just a terrible performance from them.
Yeah, this was class showing through. I mean, the Dutch were overmatched. We've talked about the enigmatic nature of the Pakistanis, and we mentioned on our last pod how there was every chance that they would play with some real freedom in this one, and that's pretty much what happened. The Pakistani pace quartet, Shaheen Afridi, Mohammad Wasim, Haris Rauf, Naseem Shah, They killed it. They had 5 for 55 from their 14 overs. I mean, you can't do much when when the four quicks are bowling, not just that dangerously, but that economically. The extra pace and bounce of the Perth wicket, they used it really well. And also when they brought on Shadab Khan, the spinner, he took advantage of the work that his paceman had done. The Dutch, knowing that they were behind the 8 ball, started batting a little bit dangerously, chasing any ball that they thought they could dispatch. And and they had to do it. They had to try and create a defendable score out of something. But Khan, he took advantage of that, picked up 3 wickets in the middle overs, which just crippled any chance of a decent Dutch total.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 2 wickets for 22 runs in his 4 overs bowling. But of course, as batting goes, Colin Wickerman, 27 for 27 with 2 fours. He was their leading scorer. And then Scott Edwards was the only other player to reach double digits. And that kind of just sums up their inning right there. It was just poor batting, even better bowling from Pakistan. But with
there was a golfing class with this one.
Absolutely. And with a low total of 91 runs, seemed like Pakistan was never in doubt to win this match. But
there's not much to say with that Pakistani innings, is there? It was a pretty rudimentary chase. Rizwan will be disappointed not to get his half century. He went out for 49. But I did see a stat afterwards. The Pakistani captain, Babar Azam, the other opening batsman, he went out for 4 runs. And, he's been in pretty rough form this tournament. But it's the first time in his international T20 career that he's been out in single digits in 3 straight innings. So you would say that he's probably due for a big one, if not, his next match than the one after, because he's in what turns out for him to be historically bad form.
Yeah, it's not something we're used to seeing from him. But, I mean, Pakistan's not completely out of it yet. They definitely need some help. But it'll be difficult. But they need to win both these next matches and have some other teams lose, which they have to play.
Crucial one next up.
Yeah, isn't it South Africa next, which could determine their entire fate. Otherwise, I mean, in the Bangladesh or in the Pakistani innings, not much else to say. As far as the bowling goes, Brandon Glover, 2 wickets for 22 runs in 2.5 overs. It was kind of just rudimentary and an easy win for Pakistan.
Yeah, the Pakis didn't get out of second gear on this one. It was a really easy chase for them.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to bounce back for the last 2 matches to recap: India versus South Africa and Australia versus Ireland. Then we'll preview the next 4 matches over the next 2 days. So we'll see you guys in a bit. Hey, we're back, everybody, and now it's time to hop into the 3 really big teams who played in the last couple of days. We'll start with India, South Africa, which was down to the very last couple balls, and South Africa ultimately won by 5 wickets, 137 for 5 to 133 for 9. But it was kind of that India batting was a little disappointing, especially Virat Kohli, who we've seen play incredibly so far, but he was only 12 runs from 11 balls and got out relatively quick.
Oh, this was a match all about the bowling for me. It was over in Perth, as we mentioned in the intro. And Perth, for those who were listening to our last spot, I ummed and ahed about picking a winner for this match. And ultimately, it's one of the few I've gotten right, but ultimately went with South Africa because they play the pace and the bounce of Perth better than India traditionally. And this match was, you look at these batting lineups, 133, 137. These batting lineups are better than that. This came down to some really good bowling. And, India batted first. And you mentioned Kohli went out cheap. KL Rahul looked all at sea. He was all over the shop when he played. Yeah. And Rohit Sharma as well. He went out pretty quickly, the veteran skipper. But ultimately, this was all about Lungi Ngidi, the tearaway quick from South Africa. 4 for 29, and he devastated the top order of the Indian batting lineup. Like fierce and aggressive pace bowling. It actually reminded me, and if there's any South Africans listening, they will lose their shit over this. They'll love it. it reminded me of Alan Donald in his early to mid 90s pomp, back when he was bowling at 150k and just scaring the shit out of people.
Sounds like he was just a guy that just blew the ball by, and good luck try and catch up to it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a classic old sledge in cricket from the mid 80s. I think I think it was Malcolm Marshall, the late West Indian fast bowler, bowling to David Boone, an Australian, and he just kept bouncing in, beating the bat, and he just walked down the pitch and said, "I won't do a Jamaican accent," but he said, "Are you go, David? Are you going to get out soon, or am I going to have to bowl around the wicket and kill you?" And that was what Ngidi was like. It was like if he decided to line up the body, he was going to kill a man. It was brilliant pace bowling.
Yeah,
I was bouncing watching it. I was so excited watching it. I love aggressive pace bowling, and yeah, he was superb.
yeah, and I mean, as far as he went, he used to mention the 4 wickets for 29 runs in his 4 overs, but he got 2 wickets in that 5th over and kind of set the pace for the South African bowling the rest of the way. Otherwise, the other guy I want to mention, Wayne Parnell, 3 wickets for 15 runs in 4 overs. He had a very solid inning bowling. Got 2 wickets.
Yeah, but Parnell opened the bowling, but then got held back a bit, which turned out to be the right decision because Ngidi tore things apart. But Parnell did his damage late on. Got all 3 of his wickets late in the innings. He got Surya Kumar Yadav, who was the only Indian to really get away in this one. He had 60 from 40 in a really good counter-attacking innings. But yeah, like Parnell was, like he was economical as well as taking wickets at the death. He bowled, quietly very well.
Yes, he did. It was a pretty solid bowling performance for them. But even when South Africa came up, we've seen Quinton de Kock kind of play pretty well so far. But he was out in the 2nd over for 1 run off 3 balls. And then Riley Rousseau, who was the hero of the last match for South Africa, no runs off 2 balls. And it looked like it was going to be a really rough inning for South Africa the way they started, but a couple players stepped up huge for them.
Yeah, look, on those 2 wickets, credit to Arshdeep Singh, the left arm quick for India. He bowled 2 ripping balls to get rid of de Kock and Rousseau, who are South Africa's 2 best batsmen. Both of those batsmen are lefties, so facing a left arm quick bowling over the wicket. Swung one, and he swung it sharply away from de Kock, caught the edge and picked up at second slip. And then a few balls later, swung it the other way just as sharply. Like big swing, but quick and late swing, which is the key to a pace bowler is late swing. And yeah, just got Rousseau trapped in front. Just like brilliant new ball bowling from Arshdeep. Temba Bavuma, he struggled again. He's had a really rough tournament. Yeah. He has just looked all at sea. Tried to ramp Mohammad Shami, but only succeeded in flicking it back to Karthik, the keeper. But then, Markham and Miller came in and put on 76 for the 4th wicket and rescued what was a pretty dire situation. They didn't score super quickly, but they did enough. Again, they weren't chasing a huge total here, but they did enough to keep the game moving. Miller in particular was really good. 4 4s, 3 6s for his 59 not out, steered the team home under pressure. But it was Markham who, I guess he was the one who put the foot down first. Yeah, he was the one that said, "Okay, we've consolidated. Now we can chase." And Miller sort of followed his lead. I was pretty impressed by both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Miller getting 59 for 46, not out. But Markham, 52 from 41, 6 boundaries, 1 6. It was really the 2 of them that kind of put South Africa on their backs and made a very winnable match for them.
Yeah, and look, this game was really close until the last few overs. With, I think, 3 overs remaining, South Africa still needed 30 runs. And Ravi Ashwin was bowling, and the game really broke open. Miller hit a couple of 6s off that over, which brought it back to something that the South Africans could comfortably chase. Ashwin did pick up Tristan Stubbs in that over, but he was a bystander. It was Miller's innings. Yeah. Shami, I really love watching Mohammad Shami bowl. He's got such good control. He bowled a gem of a 19th over, but then it was Kumar who the opening bowler for India, who bowled the last innings of the match, and he just got it all wrong. He had a poor match. With the ball all innings, he was bad, but he got it all wrong in that last over, and that allowed Miller to steer the Proteas home.
Yeah, and I mean, in that last over, he got a dot ball the first person, 1 run, and then back-to-back fours. So definitely blew it a little bit. But South Africa, looking back at it, it's really that 18th over where they got 13 runs, and it kind of just dragged them back into the match and gave them that winning opportunity, which they took advantage of.
And those sixes really took the wind. It wasn't just the fact that they were runs, it was that they were these big, huge, commanding sixes in a desperate situation. It, it brought the South Africans up a level, and you could see it deflate. You could literally see it deflate the Indians on the field. They're like, we had this, and now we're in a fight. And from there, you could. I'm not a huge believer in momentum in sports, but this was one of those occasions where you could feel the momentum shift off a couple of swings of the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this was the top two teams in Group 2 playing each other. Now South Africa leads the group over India, and it's kind of looks like, don't get me wrong, there might be another team that might pop through, but it looks like these two are destined to make that semifinal.
Yeah, and we picked these two to go through at the start of the tournament as well, all the way back in our preview pod, really.
Yeah.
And they are the best two teams in the comp. As much as Pakistan are brilliant on their day, and Bangladesh are emerging as a genuine top-notch cricket nation. Really, these two semi-final spots were India and South Africa's to lose.
Yeah.
So far, they look like they're going to secure them.
Absolutely. Before we move on to Australia, Ireland, I do have a question to pose you. How is India going to bounce back against Bangladesh? Because that's a very important match now with both teams sitting with 4 points. Do you see the Bangladeshis getting a win out there? Or?
Bangladesh do raise their game for India. They sort of see the Indians as their traditional opponents. It's almost like how Australia and New Zealand were for years when New Zealand were in the cricketing doldrums. Australia were this dominant team, and New Zealand were almost the little cousin that we patronised to a degree. Nowadays, very much not. New Zealand are a cricketing powerhouse, but India and Bangladesh are a similar relationship to what Australia and New Zealand were in, say, the late 90s. And India don't necessarily care about Bangladesh, but Bangladesh care a lot about putting up performance against India. So, realistically, India should take it. They were my favourites to win the tournament before they had a few injuries. They are miles better than the Bangladeshis, but I think we'll get a closer match than what it should be on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll now move on to the last match that's happened in the last couple of days. Your team, Australia, against Ireland, and the Aussies won by 42 runs, 179 for 5 to 137. But it's, as we're discussing earlier, it's not exactly what happened on the pitch that in the match that's the key notes of this. It's more what's happening regarding the injuries to Aaron Finch and Marcus Stoinis, at least.
Yeah, and to Tim David as well. He didn't come out to bat. Oh, sorry, apologies. He came out to bat but didn't come out to field. So Finch, after what feels like about 2 years of scratching around for runs and really only being in the side because he's the captain, and in the game against Sri Lanka, he did have 40-odd, but it was the worst 40-odd runs you'll ever see. It was a horrible looking innings. This time against the Irish, he was a little bit scratchy at the start, but he found his groove. 63 off 44, 5 fours, 3 sixes, including one monstrous hit. He started to look like the Aaron Finch of old, as opposed to the old Aaron Finch. And it's great to see because everyone loves Aaron Finch. Like, Australians just love him. He's a ripping guy. But in late on when Australia were bowling, he was running to field the ball and pulled up with a hamstring. And when he was accepting his Man of the Match award for this one, he didn't sound all that confident about the injury. So I would expect that Finch will probably miss the next game. And given the nature of hamstrings, they're usually 2 to 3 week injuries, we may have seen the last of him. And this is his international swan song. So there is every chance that Aaron Finch doesn't play another match in Australian colours.
Yeah, which should have been a loss considering it looks like he got back into the groove of things in the last couple matches, especially today for against Ireland. But Marcus Stoinis also, you said, pulled up with an injury, and he was 35 for 25 with 3 4s, 1 6. But what do you know or what do you think of his injury?
Yeah, I don't know too much about what's happened with Stoinis or Tim David. Honestly, I think Tim David's he's an explosive player, but he's replaceable in that Australian side. Stoinis isn't. He's a very, very good fielder. He is like the bowling option outside of the core 5 for Australia. And also, as we saw against Sri Lanka, when he's on, he's one of the most explosive batsmen in world cricket. He is a guy that can take a game away or get your team back into a game in a matter of 3 overs. And yeah, there's a few players that can do that in the Australian lineup, but maybe it's him and Glenn Maxwell are the only 2 that are right up here at that genuine, they can take any attack apart on their day level. So I'm not sure what happens there. Maybe this gives Steve Smith a reprieve, the Test superstar batsman. But I'm not really sure what happens there. Australia have got a few worrying little injuries here. The next 24 hours will tell us a lot about what happens to the Australian lineup for their next game. But we probably should focus on the actual game itself at some point.
Get right back to, I was going to mention the Irish bowling. It was really kind of a 2-man show with Barry McCarthy and Josh Little. Josh Little's been pretty outstanding in this World Cup. He went 2 wickets today for 21 runs in 4 overs. McCarthy, 3 wickets for 29 in his 4 overs. But outside of that, it was not great bowling from the Irish.
No, look, I thought Dockrell bowled okay. You say you've been impressed by Josh Little. Outside of today, he was good. In his last game, he was good. But before that, I've been a bit underwhelmed by him.
Okay.
But maybe it's just finding his feet. The Australian conditions are unlike pretty much anywhere else in the world. And the other issue with Australia is that every ground you go to, it's not like England where grounds can be an hour apart. It's a 4.5-hour flight between Melbourne and Perth. They're completely different cities in different climates with different conditions. So you have to get used to a different ecosystem every time you move to a different ground in Australia. So maybe Little's just struggled to find his feet, but the last 2 matches he's looked really, really good.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that stood out to me, not for a good reason, was Mark Adair. 59 runs allowed in his 4 overs, no wickets. Seemed like Australia just had his number in this match and took advantage of that.
Yeah, Finch took advantage of him. Mitch Marsh had 28 off 22 and was looking for all the world, like he was going to take the game apart. But he seemed to take a real liking to Mark Adair.
But I mean, as far as the Irish innings go, not a whole lot to really say outside of Lawson Tucker, who was 71 runs off 48 balls, not out, 9 4s, 1 6. But after that, it was just a huge, huge drop off. And got to credit some of that to the Australian bowling, but disappointing for Ireland considering they beat England and were maybe looking to at least make this a competitive match.
Well, I got to admit, the way Australia bowled at the start, it looks like Ireland were going to go out for 80 rather than 137. Yeah. Glenn Maxwell came on earlier than what he usually does and picked up 2 wickets in an over. Mitch Starc came out and picked up Curtis Camphor first ball and then bowled George Dockrell the same over. And both of them clean bowled. Like, these were gorgeous, gorgeous deliveries, swinging back in. Like, it was the classic, that classic Mitch Starc delivery. But yeah, I mean, even Balbirnie went out early to come and stepped across his crease, and the ball swung past him. But ultimately, Lachlan Tucker was really, really good in this game. As you mentioned, 71 of 48, 9 boundaries and a 6. If he didn't bat through the innings, let's say he goes out for 20, no one came along with him for the ride. The next highest score was Gareth Delaney down in the lower middle order with 14. Adair and Sterling had 11. They were the only other batsmen in double figures.
Yeah,
Ireland could have lost this by 100 runs if Tucker didn't bat the way he did. He was really, really good.
yeah, he really impressive and kind of not that he saved Ireland, but he was the only one who showed up for Ireland and
Yeah.
played as good as he could without that. But I mean, you mentioned all the early wickets. After the fourth over, Ireland was 5 for 25, which
Mm.
is at that point it looked like it was going to be very, very short, quick work. And you mentioned some of the Australian bowling, but four guys finished with 2 wickets, which just shows the all-aroundness of it. And sure,
Yeah, and
start.
I got to admit, I didn't think Pat Cummins bowled particularly well, but it was really good to see Adam Zampa back in the lineup. He is one of the best T20 spin bowlers in the world. He's tough to get away. He picks up wickets. He's a good fielder as well. Not as good as his understudy, Ashton Agar, in the field, but and certainly not as good with the bat as Agar. But as a bowler, Zampa's one of the best. He's a fantastic bowler. So it was good to see him back after his COVID scare. And he really slowed down what passed for an Irish run chase in this one, which was really just Tucker belting crap out of the ball. But Zampa was the one who just slowed things down. And we're talking about Hasaranga. I think it was Hasaranga we were talking about before, where we were saying, he was only able to be picked off for singles. Zampa was a very similar type of scenario. Bowled 4 overs, only 9 dot balls, but he only gave up 19 runs from his 4 overs. He was really economical and tough to put away.
Yeah, for sure. Looking ahead to the next match, Australia plays Afghanistan, and as we mentioned, Afghanistan lost their opener, who has been a key part of their performances so far. But Ireland plays New Zealand, and I don't have a good feeling about that for the Irish. It could be a very similar, if not worse, result than they did against Australia today. But let's hop into the previews for the next 4 matches over the next couple days. Start with Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and I feel like this is kind of straightforward. I feel like Sri Lanka will bounce back after the loss against New Zealand and beat the bejesus off of Afghanistan.
I would expect so. Having said that, Afghanistan, we haven't really seen them get on the surface, I want to say Sri Lanka, but when I looked at the table, there were a couple of things that stood out to me. Afghanistan have played 3 games, but 2 of them have been washed out.
Yeah.
So ultimately, they've gotten effectively 2 draws, whereas Sri Lanka have played 3, won 1, and lost 2. But the Afghani net run rate is actually better than Sri Lanka's. Now, effectively, that's from 1 game, so it's a small sample size. But I don't know. I mean, Sri Lanka have gotten better as the tournament's gotten on, but I don't know. Could Afghanistan pull an upset here? Sri Lanka will surely realise they're out of it. So do they drop their guard here and the Afghanis take advantage? I'm not prepared to go as far as to tip it, but I'll say the Sri Lankans will win, but I'm not saying it with an awful lot of confidence.
No, I think we could see Afghanistan win, but I just have a feeling Sri Lanka will show the level of class difference to an extent, despite the strong Afghanistan bowling. But next matchup, England, New Zealand, will tell us a lot, as I mentioned earlier, about that Group 1. And as an England fan, I don't really see much hope in that. I feel like New Zealand's just playing too well at the moment. But a loss for England really kind of puts Australia in the driver's seat for that second semi-final place.
Yeah, I honestly, with Australia only having Afghanistan to play, England have to win this. They just have to win this. There's no other choice. They've got a better net run rate than Australia, mostly thanks to that abomination of the game Australia played against the Kiwis. But it's T20 cricket and anything can happen. But as you said, Jerry, New Zealand are playing superb cricket right now. I would expect them to win. And as an Australian, they had better bloody will win. That's all I can say. They are our only real hope to get into the semi-finals at the moment. They have to beat England. If they don't, I reckon England make the semis.
But no, knowing they'll beat New Zealand this in the next couple days, and then they'll lose to Sri Lanka and miss out completely. But we'll see. The other match now will bounce back to Group Two, Netherlands versus Zimbabwe, and I,
In the Who Cares Cup.
yeah, exactly.
No, that's a horrible thing to say. I shouldn't say that.
It,
Because ultimately Zimbabwe is still in with an outside shot here.
yeah.
Everyone's played 3 games in Group Two, and India and Bangladesh are on 4 points in second and third. Zimbabwe's only a point behind them, and they have the Netherlands, the weakest team in their group, still to play. So they should win it, and I think they'll win it pretty comfortably. But yeah, I mean, is there a chance Zimbabwe can, if results go their way, can they sneak in and steal a semi-final spot here?
That'd be quite remarkable if it did. I would be super excited to see the Zimbabwe side in the semifinals. I don't think it'll end up happening, but it would be really, really entertaining to see.
I've just had a look at who they play last, and it's India. So I'm probably I'm gonna backtrack on that. But yeah, look, I think they'll take care of the Dutch pretty comfortably.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the last match for these next 2 days, we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but Bangladesh and India, 2 teams both on 4 points, a must win for both of them to try and level themselves up in that spot race for the semifinal. But what are your thoughts on that match, and who do you think gets through or wins that?
Yeah, India should win it. They're too strong in the batting department, too strong in the bowling department. Bangladesh will step up their game for this one. This is their grand final. We spoke about the Irish beating England, and it's almost like, well, whatever happens from here doesn't matter because we beat the English. The Bangladeshis are a better side than Ireland, and India is their grand final. They know they're not going to win a World Cup, but if they can come home with a win over India, then they've done their job. So I think they'll push really, really hard on this, but I ultimately don't think it'll matter. It'll be a relatively close game, I'm tipping, but I think India will come through.
And I mean, as far as goes, if they do get this win, like we've mentioned, they could, they probably won't, but then all they have left is Pakistan to play in the group stage, and we could see Bangladesh in the semifinals if they get a win against India.
Who knows what happens with Pakistan? They're a genuine wild card.
Yeah, it's good days, bad days.
Yeah,
kind of everything you can think of will happen to them one way or another. But that's kind of all the matches we have to preview and recap. Is there anything else you want to mention or any final thoughts before we head out?
I'm praying to all the gods I can think of for health for the Australian team. But no, aside from that, look, I'm kind of happy that we've got games that are steering clear of Melbourne and Sydney at the moment, because that means we don't get any more washouts.
Yes.
Touch all the wood. It's good to see some actual, after the last few pods where we've had to skip over a few matches, it's nice to be able to talk about a whole raft of completed matches again.
Yeah, full slate. Great talk as always. You guys can check out all of our stuff at Vendetta Sports Media's website, our YouTube channel, our Twitter page. We post everything up on there. But you can reach out to us as well. Reach out to Jarrod on Twitter at hey_it's_JP. Reach out to me at JerryF007. We want to hear your thoughts on the Cricket World Cup. With this late in the groups, they're in the Super 12 stage. Who do you think gets through? We want to know that. We want to hear your choices. Is Bangladesh going to upset India and get through? Is England or Australia going to get that second spot after New Zealand? We want to hear your thoughts. But that's all from us. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.